Okay, let's do it. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's prequel podcast, where we're going to talk about scaling engineering teams while balancing speed and quality. I'm your host. I'm Tony Meehan, the CTO and co-founder of Prequel. And today we're honored. I'm excited to actually talk to Bhavin Surela, our guest today. He's a senior director of engineering at Twilio, where he's driving technical direction, team management, cross-team collaboration to power the company's cloud communications platform. If you're not familiar with Twilio, they enable businesses to connect with customers through messaging and voice and video. If you don't know that you're using them, you probably are. He's been at Twilio for about 6 years. Bhavin's held key leadership roles, overseeing strategic initiatives across engineering teams. He has extensive engineering experience, including building next generation marketing platforms at companies like SendGrid, and leading cross-functional efforts at ad tech platforms like Adara. He's a versatile leader. Bhavin, combines technical expertise with strategic thinking to achieve organizational goals. And like I said, we're really excited to chat with Bhavin today on a number of topics. So, Bhavin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. I'm super excited to be here myself. This is a topic that I really love. And like you said earlier, right, I love to geek out on engineering management and technology. So I'm really excited to be here, talk to you, explore the depths of conversation, and listen to your attendees and hopefully answer some of their questions. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, I'm embarrassed to admit how excited I am to talk about this stuff, but I think it's really important. And kind of for the audience, the topics that we'll kind of come across today, we'll dive into strategic decision making and prioritization, team structure and culture, engineering efficiency, productivity and tools. We'll also love to talk about reliability and resilience and incident management, and kind of end it with a look towards the future. But first, maybe we could get a bit of a Bhavin origin story. Tell us, how did you come to, work in software engineering, and how did you move into management? Would love to kind of get, the Bhavin origin story.
Thanks, Tony. That's always an interesting question. I always really feel like, I don't have a really exciting story about that. My path is pretty traditional. I will say I grew up in India, and over there, like many, many billions of people, I aspired to become a sports person, a cricketer. And my family is full of doctors, so my family really wanted me to be a doctor. So all my life, I thought I'll be just a doctor or I'll be a cricketer. And then eventually, I didn't, ended up like going into engineering, almost like by an accident. Decided like, yeah, maybe this is something that I should try. It looks interesting to me. So jumped into the engineering, did my bachelor's there, master's over in Syracuse University, New York, and then I ended up working in some big and small companies. I also went into management unknowingly a little bit. I was working on a project and I was sort of a tech lead of the project. It was a large team of like 15 people or so. And the director working over there sort of left, and the CTO basically left me in charge. So here I was, basically first time manager, not knowing anything about management, and now being handed over a team of 12 to 15 people just to work with. So that's when I learned more about that I can really multiply my efforts and technically make improvements in the company, as well as impact people's life in the management career. So that's what excited me about management. So then I formally started pursuing that a little bit more methodically, and here I am, right? So the journey has been interesting, but since then it's been very traditional also at the same time. So yeah, that's the rough origin story for me.
Amazing. And I mean, I think the origin story of getting into management that you just told us, I think is fairly common. I certainly, that was my experience as well, doing kind of individual contributor development work and getting the tap on the shoulder. I actually think that's why conversations like this are so important, because we go to school to learn how to do development and how to engineer and build, and it's an entirely different skill set to build teams, build culture, lead teams. And I think giving ourselves opportunities to talk to one another to learn about, from each other, things that have worked, things that have not worked, I think is really important. Because again, we often find ourselves like pushed into the position sort of unknowingly. So that's an awesome origin story. Thank you for sharing it. And we should probably just jump in maybe with a question around overseeing large engineering teams. Like how do you balance maybe doing what's kind of strategically right for the long-term health of the product and the business, and balance that with like urgent, like right now, challenges or technical debt, things that inevitably arise that maybe can come in conflict with that longer term strategy. Like how do you think about balancing those two things?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you. I think there are a few things that I've learned over time. Previously, if you asked me these questions a few years ago, that would be, a Bhavin over there would basically answer like just just ignore the urgent, just keep focusing on the important, and that kind of. Over time, I've learned that the urgent fires that often comes actually tell you. Future important matters quite a bit, and maybe some pitfalls that we have made as an organization around us. And since then, I've really sort of started to really like the Eisenhower matrix more and more. If folks are not familiar, it's basically a very simple grid of urgent versus important. And I've spent an explicit amount of energy trying to focus on the important matters. Of course, urgent fires will come and they will be needing to be tackled. But generally speaking, right, the more and more I have explicitly tried to spend my time in, things that are important, that actually really helped me reduce the fires on the urgent pieces. And to your point, right, when I've had, something that's urgent, that's coming, that's pressing, I think tackling that is important. So figuring out what is it is trying to tell us and how does it impact the business over the short term. And sometimes that's just needing to be done, right? So I think the bigger part about that is for a leader is you need to be aware what is urgent and what is important for the business at the moment. It could not be an isolated decision or an isolated uh, piece. It needs to be connected to the top down strategy. So to make that right decision, I think the leader first need to be very clear about the business, where the company is going and where the business is coming from. Is the urgent fire specifically? Are we going to see more and more of this in the future? Is solving this one time is going to solve it for n number of times for the rest of our customers? I think those questions needs to be answered very clearly so that we can identify what is the simple path to fix it. Either is it a hot patch in likely put, or is it something that you need to thoughtfully design and articulate in an engineering architecture. um, and then after that, I feel what has worked recently for us, candidly, we have not been, or I have not been really great at measuring a lot of things. But like, measuring where we spend time and energy for the organization also tells us how we are planning it. So measuring like how much, time or energy we have spent in just urgent fires or important matters and unplanned work. And those have sort of helped us prepare better for some of these things, because some are maybe not in our control, some are in our control that we can actually do something about it. So it's a complex matter. I don't think it's a very straightforward answer, but like generally, I spend my time more in uh, getting clarity and understanding the business, understanding the company priority as much as I can, so I have energy and clarity to make those decisions. The other piece is, identifying what is urgent, what is important very clearly with those lens, and then measuring and then to continue to reflect that cycle.
Yeah, that's awesome. And actually, I really like thinking tools, things that can kind of help you view a problem in a different way. And so, when you talk about the Eisenhower matrix, I think that's always intriguing. And maybe for the audience that maybe hasn't had much, familiarity with it, can you kind of talk, the next level of detail around what is it and how do you use it? Like, are you literally plotting the matrix, or are you just kind of just thinking it as like a framework in your head? Like, would love to kind of hear you talk a little bit more about that as a tool to kind of get clarity on this problem.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, that's what I literally do. At some point there are pieces that you are not sure where they fit, and I try basically there's an urgent, not urgent, important, not urgent, not important, right? And that basically gives you a combination of two and two for urgent and important. Basically, the what it tells us and what I try to do is I try to not do anything that is not urgent or important. And basically not try to get my team to avoid doing anything those pieces as well. So that's a lot of like don't do kind of pieces. That leaves the time for some of the urgent and important matters that are something that needs to be tackled right away. And then there's something that is usually not urgent but important. That is the matrix the box that I try to spend most of my time. Where how do I plan for it? So if I don't plan for it, I know it's going to end up in the urgent and the important box sooner than. So that's an exercise that I reflect on pieces that I feel it's not very obvious to me, and usually I find myself that it's not easy to put some particular projects or some particular requests in those boxes, and that's where you seek out more clarity from an organization, like okay, why is this important? What's the business rationale for doing something right now? Why cannot it wait? Who will care if something like this does not happen? And how does it impact our long-term strategy of the company? And that sort of helps you pick like, okay, this particular thing is actually just a stepping stone to larger term strategy. So it's actually it's important to do the right way and take some time versus like, yeah, this is a one-off thing. It's not something that's going to come, but it's just important to do and urgent to do right now. So we just have to do it. So that's sort of the way I try to manage. And then the other piece is there's other box over there, right? I forget which one I talked, but then there's a delegation piece, which you sort of talk about, like how can you leverage other people who may see the opportunity a little differently, and tackle it with more care and love, right? So that's how I typically use it. It's a tool, like you said, to analyze some of the ambiguous projects like that.
No, that's awesome. And I can imagine if you have things clustering too much in the bottom left or top right, like either scenario is probably not great for different reasons. So I love thinking tools like that. So I think that's
Yeah.
really helpful.
Yeah.
And maybe related, again, Twilio is doing a lot. I'm sure you have in parallel a lot of kind of longer term strategic initiatives as well as sort of short term, got to get this done tomorrow objectives. And I'm sure many of those kind of longer term things are big bets and they're not going to pay off for, months or years. And so I would love to kind of hear how you think about, balancing those two things and kind of getting meaningful work done in both categories of short-term things, short-term wins versus kind of longer-term strategic objectives.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting question. We do have like a lot of projects, and I rightfully said you said like there are a lot of bets that we make, and I think there is something very critical about how we align on that, or specifically how I try to drive the organization for that. Um, Basically when we're making some decision that is non-traditional or something different, I think the big thing that I really like, and this is actually I think a page from Amazon, where identifying if the decisions are reversible or not, right? There's sometimes I've found like a lot of energy, a lot of time being spent on something that can be changed in the future. It's not going to lock us down. Yes, it might be just sheer labor, and it might be more work, but essentially it allows us to go one way or the other way even in the future. So I think I try for those major bets or the short term things, I try to make that pieces a little bit more easier. So if the decisions or things can be reversible, maybe not spend as much time on it and try to chip away on things. The other pieces that you mentioned, right? Like how if the bets are not going to pay off for a very long time, um, how do we keep it, protected from the short term initiatives that keep coming? And I think that is a tough one. I think we as engineers like to solve problems. I think A lot of times I've seen if you can break down the problem into smaller pieces, that sort of helps. So, the trying to chip away on the problem as much as I can versus like doing a big bang or a step function win for the larger major changes. I think even better for the organization. I think also better for the team because those big bang stuff take time, and it's actually very difficult for the leaders to keep everybody motivated, without seeing any incremental wins. So that is one big area that I try to emphasize my energy, help my team figure out how can we break this problem into meaningful chunks so that we can actually do this whole project or the release iteratively as much as possible. It's difficult. It's more difficult than it appears. I'm sure people in engineering will plus one. But the other part of this is uh, it's important is the culture of experimentation. I think a lot of times I have battled this within my organization. Other like people don't want to throw away pieces that they've built, and I recognize and acknowledge that. But I think if we are trying to chip away or if you're trying to do some short term and then there's going to be a long term strategic goal, I think there are going to be cases where some things need to be rewritten. So I always tell my engineers like be prepared to throw away your code and go from there, right? So it's a matter of like building a culture of experimentation, identifying some wins. It's more of like thinking like a scientist where you solve a problem, hypothesize something, and then aim to solve it in a smaller chunk and then iterate over it. If it doesn't work, move on to the next solution and so on and so forth, versus just planning out everything and then trying to make the perfect solution in one way. That has helped keep protecting the longer term goals versus the the short term initiatives that sort of come and may disrupt, and
Uh,
has also helped the team a little bit keeping close and protected from like the larger, longer projects.
I was just gonna say that that really resonates with me. I just since we've been working with Prequel, that philosophy of experimentation is so important, especially because whatever plans you have for an idea or feature, rarely do they survive first contact with customer input and feedback. And so the longer you go without that feedback, the increased risk you have of maybe doing the wrong thing. So I that really resonates with me. And yeah, the experimentation and not being married to code that you write, I think is just so important. So that's awesome. And maybe kind of related to this, like how do you approach these strategic trade-offs when deciding, like, you could have a legacy system that's been around for a long time, maybe no new features are being added to it, but it's still a big revenue producer. I'm kind of curious, how do you decide when to retire or refocus on efforts like that to kind of focus on sustainable growth without spreading resources too thin? I mean, it's definitely a problem that I've had experience with. Curious to get your feedback. Like, how do you think about this?
Yeah, that question really hits hard because we do have legacy systems that produce a lot of good revenue for good reasons, and they are a nightmare to manage when it comes to engineering management or architecture and all those pieces. And like it's just because there's always a shelf life on the architecture and the scale that sort of comes when you're building an architecture or like complex engineering solution, right? So over time, I think one of the big values or lessons that I've learned is deprecating anything is hard, especially if it is a breaking change for the customer. It's very hard. Asking some our customers or asking anybody who's using our stuff, especially paying us for do that, and basically saying like, hey, that's going away and you have to migrate or do whatever, is just a hard thing to do. And as a user of the service, we have to put ourselves in their shoes and say like, that's tough. So I think first of all, just having that mindset helps, just to you know basically be in the shoes of the customer and therefore recognize that the legacy systems, although maybe painful, are actually adding value to the business and to the customers.
I was just reflecting upon, your your conversation
Yeah.
around legacy systems, and I was, we all have experience with, you know, some kind of example like this. I certainly have a couple in sort of in my in my career, and I think that this is where really good engineering culture and practices matter and pay off, because if you've built a product, like everything we work on is inevitably going to become legacy. And so if early on you're investing in really good engineering, it becomes more efficient to operate that product, that feature, that capability later on. So you don't need the entire engineering organization to run it if it's operating really well and it's easy to maintain and easy to kind of keep running. If it
Yeah.
comes with a lot of baggage and problems and bugs and crashes, then it's an entirely different story, and it can be wasteful.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly, exactly. And for that particular thing, I think it's again, it might we probably it's a matter of priority at the end of the day. So just working with the business counterparts, and that's where I think it gets more interesting. I think usually on the engineering side, we are aligned like, hey, we wanna deprecate this, or we want to change the architecture, and this is how it's going to impact the customers. But it's on the business side that we need to get more alignment on. So then as a leader of the org, that becomes the priority, just aligning more people on this is the new path forward and ensuring a smooth transition out
yeah,
of it, if especially it's paying not working out so much for
yeah.
yeah.
Well, this is a good segue maybe into another topic around team structure and culture and development. And maybe one of the questions I always love to ask, especially kind of hiring managers, is what do you look for when you're hiring a software developer? What are the qualities and things that you kind of make sure you're hiring for and bringing onto your team?
Yeah, that's a good question because we are hiring, and I had some of this conversation yesterday. So I think it depends a little bit on the level of the person that we are hiring, obviously. But to generalize it, uh, I think there are a few things that are important when we are hiring. I think there might be a reason that we are hiring. It probably, I'm just going to assume a case where we are hiring for a gap in the team, and that gap might be a skill gap or a specific attitude gap in the team. So from that perspective, I think it's important that whoever we hire basically fills that gap. But generally speaking, right, if you're talking about hiring a little bit more of a senior engineer or a senior person overall, the big things that I usually look for is can they talk about what they have done in a little bit of depth in their prior companies, more so not to assess so much about what the complexity was, but then how much involved they were. So understanding the business, understanding the product, and understanding how things worked really matter. The other pieces is communication has become more and more important over the time. The world has gone remote for a lot of us, and then also the teams are getting more and more distributed as I see it. So having a clear ability to communicate has become more and more important. The other piece, the big piece out of it is, can somebody learn, right? I think a lot of the skills that we use tactically, I think, are all learnable. There's nothing that's inherently just not learnable from the software engineering piece. So, can they learn new things? And what is their attitude about their learning in general? Do they have the growth mindset? Those are the big pieces that I typically look for, and generally saying like it might I personally might also over index on the growth mindset and the communication a slightly bit more, even if they have a little bit less. Let's say they don't know X technology. I think that can be coached, especially if the team around them is good at coaching, and we have experts, and we're not specifically just missing a critical skill gap. Those are the ways or things that I look for when somebody's joining. And of course, whenever the company you are in, you want to make sure that the values align and the culture align, the time zone, and a lot of those other things. But yeah, I think the things that I mentioned, I think go a long way.
Yeah, and I know that you've talked about, organizations can really only move as fast as, the speed of trust amongst individuals and teams, which I think really resonates with me too. So I'm curious, kind of, what's your take on how you build trust within engineering teams, and across functions to kind of empower people to take meaningful ownership over the work that they do?
Yeah, that's a good topic. It's also something that I always feel like I can always do more and more on it, because is I think it's fundamental. I don't think that any leader can be more effective if they don't have good trust. I was just rereading the book yesterday about 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. It talked about influence also, and then the foundation of that influence was relationship and trust as well. So I think generally speaking, if you, it's so important for a leader to have trust, and the way I have approached that is with transparency as much as possible, right? So as a leader, I think I feel like as you grow and grow, it actually gets a little bit more. You're often alone. So as you're making as a leader, you're often alone. But as much as we can share and be transparent to our team, I think it helps both ways, and actually it builds quite a bit of trust, right? So um, that is the big tool that I use. Not it doesn't mean like share everything as you're seeing, but overall, just speaking from both sides of the business as well as the employee, and just being that transparent pipe of communication as a leader. I think had really helped me get build trust. And then the other piece was around communication. The team and the organization, I feel, wants to hear from the leader. They want to know that they're around. They know what's going on the ground. I think as a leader to be effective, we also need to know that, and for that, communication is important. And in this particular aspect, both telling and listening, right? Obviously, listening what people are saying, and then obviously telling them what's coming from the org side of the house, and doing it frequently, even if there is not specifically a major news to share. Just being there to listen, I think, is more important. So that frequent communication is really important. And then as a leader of the craft, right, issues are going to happen, things are going to go sideways sometime. I think one really good way for me to build trust was to be on the battlefield with the team, right? So sometimes incidents happen, and if the leader is nowhere to be found, that's a really easy way, in my opinion, to lose trust of the team. Not that you are there solving problems or checking in code, but like ensuring and uh, support, and recognizing that these things happen and how we treat the team after that. I think those pieces really go a long way. And of course, if you can chip away at some of these other things, like tactically solve some of the problems, I think that definitely builds more trust, because it shows that you have the knowledge, you have the capabilities as a leader as well. So that is easier to uh, for other people to then trust, and then obviously follow you as a leader.
I love the idea of being a good leader often is really good at knowing when they should become an individual contributor and sort of, hey, my job right now isn't to communicate, it's to be in there with you, helping in any way I can. Like, hand me a shovel, I'll dig with you. I think honestly, like, that's good for so many reasons, not just building trust, but learning and experiencing, some of the challenges that your team maybe faces that they can only kind of communicate if you can kind of see it firsthand. I think that's like a remarkable way to learn about, the product, the team, your customers. So I think that's awesome. There's many wins that come from doing that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, what about like, how do you identify emerging engineering leaders and mentor, managers and architects to kind of, grow your team and scale your team and allow them to become highly engaged and effective building teams?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is something that I've pondered quite a bit. I think a long time ago I had a blog about that, but but I think that the big piece about that I think has still resonated with me is, as the org goes, I think there is some natural leadership that sort of conforms. Not I don't mean titles, and I don't mean the official, like, hey, you're the manager or you're the architect for this particular. But if you look at the org, there's generally a few individuals who people look to for answers when they're stuck, or basically as a role model. So I think those people what they have is the leadership qualities. They're able to influence others and make changes in their behavior without any sort of official authority. I think that's a really good hallmark of potential leader, in my opinion, is to be able to influence without authority as much as they can. So the other piece on when you're assigning a formal leadership is um, the other piece that I talked about, that the credibility in the rest of the org, because as the person grows in the org, the more and more function becomes cross-functional. So it's important not to just have their own team respect and influence them, but the rest of the organization also be be listening to them and getting influenced by them. So those pieces, I think, the credibility goes a long way, where you have done some work, some individual that have proven themselves out over time. I think that speaks for when you put them in an official position, they're going to go a long way, and they're going to use their prior work or art as credibility, right? And the other piece is like, are they motivated to grow? Because no matter what they have done, I think leadership throws very complex challenges and situations at you, which might be people skills or some other org shift. And like when COVID times, everything changed also. And then in general, like the business and the environment around us keeps moving. So in leader inherently needs to be, yeah, growth mindset, in my opinion, needs to be able to learn and stay a little bit more self-motivated. So I think the combination of these three things, I think makes a great leader. So you won't have every single thing in every single person or emerging leader, but like if you think anything can be like any of these things can be coached, I think they are the good um, elements of a good upcoming leader.
Yeah, I totally agree. The maybe last question around this topic, how do you, in most engineering organizations, you have this mostly healthy tension between, engineering, product, and design. And when that's working really well, it's great for the organization. And so I'm kind of curious, just, given your extensive experience working with large teams across these three functions, like how do you ensure people are aligned and really meeting customer needs and working well together? Like I just would love to hear you kind of talk through that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally speaking, I think it all for me had stemmed from understanding the business really well. And I say that because when I take time to understand the business, and not just by my point of view, by like the business point of view, where why every function does what it does and why they're looking at it from X perspective. I think that has really helped me understand like why everybody's is involved in a way that they're particularly involved. So a good example would be, when I build something, a long time ago, I used to think like engineers build things, product, usually aligns on how the product is, and everything else is sort of magical, right? But then after I've worked closely with more go-to-market team, finance teams, and other teams, I've gained new perspective and empathy on the work that they do is actually just as much important on making any product successful. Like we can have the best product, but like without having the market know-how of the timing and all these pieces, they sort of like just live there like a ghost, right? So I think having that perspective helps us develop empathy. That I think is automatically allowing or empowering us to build better relationships, which I think go a long way. So take the time, in my opinion, to understand the business from all different angles and why is everything important. Explicitly, build relationships. I think a lot of the nature of a leader is to build relationships, because I think obstacles are going to also come from all the different places. Um, and then just be like, don't be a jerk, and just thinking of like, hey, this is my thing, and this is the only thing that's the most important thing. It's actually not the case, right? So that's where I think developing empathy and having a holistic understanding of businesses empowers leaders to just build better relationship. And then when you have empathy, I think you approach things a little bit more differently. Uh, and that helps us maintaining this tension in the right way. And when you need something, then your relationship sort of helps you out.
Yes. I couldn't have said it better. And honestly, like, yeah, if you could put it as concise as possible, just don't be a jerk. Like that, yeah, to get anything meaningful done at scale, you have to work with other people. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
fundamentally true.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Okay, so maybe we'll pivot, and I would love to get, what's your experience been like over the last 2 or 3 years with advances in AI and developer tools? Like, how are you talking about these new capabilities with your teams? Maybe even how are you using them yourself? Like, how are you harnessing a lot of these newer capabilities to kind of boost productivity?
Yeah, I think AI is a hot keyword right now, right? It's like a hot topic everywhere. So I think the way I have approached it and I have sort of guided my team towards it is like understand it first, like understand it as a tool before we can make judgments about anything, right? So overall, uh, personally for me, what I've done is I've tried to understand what can be done a little bit more with these LLMs that are out there. What are the types? I mean, ChatGPT sort of started, but then there are a lot of other LLMs now that are out there, and what can be done in this whole conversational nature of LLMs. And what is it a good tool for? So I actually did some courses myself. There's some Coursera, Udemy courses that I really like, and then just trying to educate myself more so that I can, one, understand the technology better and therefore then apply it a little bit better in the day to day. So that's been the big thing. The other piece is what we have seen overall from the engineering team side. I think the most useful thing that I could directly say right now is I think the Copilot has been really helpful, and in just producing more code quickly. I think the jury is still out if we have overall a better code. But I think generally speaking, what I'm hearing is positive trends from the developers in the team to be able to use that and leverage it like an assistant. And then, but I think the expertise on problem solving is still important and needed. The other big area where we have seen productivity improvements is automation. I think personally, I spend a lot of time reading a lot of documents and those kind of things. So that has helped me sort of keep up, like summarization tools, or I think we have used some AI on the incident management as well, where it sort of helps you as a leader sort of navigate some of these urgent problems rather quickly. So those pieces have been helpful. And then oftentimes I've also seen people use some of these AI, successfully in doing some research and identifying some faster ways to plan things. So I think it's a very exciting time to be a developer, in my opinion. There are a lot of good tools out there that really helps and scale 0 to 1 really quickly. So that has been useful. And my thing about this is like just learn it as much as you can, and then try to apply it where you can. I don't use it as like a hammer for everything. We have other tools for other things, but like once you understand a little bit more, I think it gives us big, uh, good clarity on when we should apply it, when it's the right way to apply it. So that's been the stance.
That's been my experience with it as well. Now that I'm, basically I'm a software developer now, and that's what I'm doing 12, 13 hours a day. And what I've learned is I can leverage a large language model to help me kind of read the docs, whereas before LLMs, I probably rarely would read the docs. I just jump in and learn through mistakes and then eventually go and search for that piece of the documentation I should have read to begin with. But now it's just so much faster to ask a question and the LLM has already read the docs and it's compressed that knowledge. And often, it gives you a fairly good answer. You still have to kind of go and reference check that, make sure it's correct. But I found that like you said, going from 0 to 1 is so much faster now, especially when you're learning how to do something in a new library, a new language, whatever it is. I think I totally agree. I think it is extremely exciting to be a software developer right now. I'm glad I'm doing it again because yeah, the tools that we have at our disposal to kind of move faster, it's insane how like night and day difference compared to 20 years ago. So yeah, I totally agree. I would love to talk a little bit about, reliability and resilience and incident management. At Prequel, we're really focused on problem detection. So I always love hearing, perspectives like yours on these topics. And so maybe to start, could you just kind of walk us through at a high level, like how you've improved, mean time to recovery at Twilio, and like what are some of the knowledge sharing approaches that you've used to help engineers kind of quickly tackle production issues? Like how have you kind of focused on improving resiliency at Twilio?
Yeah, resiliency is like an important factor, very important factor when you have a scale as we have, and then also so many customers depend on for numerous workflows, right? So generally speaking, right, I think where I found more success on reduction of MTTR and various teams have led, right, in Twilio and outside is usually MTTR being mean time to recovery for a customer problem. I think I've always found more value when I go back to basics on finding out exactly what are we trying to solve. I'll give you an example. In one of the teams, we had like over 150 monitors and dashboards trying to measure some, like, I don't know, 40,000 customers or something like that. Very difficult for a team size that we had at the time. And it was very clear at that point, that we are something is missing. We're not measuring something properly, and we are trying to do too much. So the bigger exercise on reducing or customer journeys is going back to basics on figuring out what exactly are we solving customers for. So what I call is customer journeys, and going back to, like, working with our product stakeholders, what is the customer journey value add that we provide as a team and we are responsible for? And I'm always surprised how interesting conversation that becomes, because a lot of time everybody comes with a different perspective, and this is not only true at Twilio. This is true at a lot of other places that I've worked, and I've talked to a lot of other leaders as well, right? Because over time systems grow and customers use cases grow and teams grow, and then we leave out with some of this different understanding of what is the one thing that we do as a in our team that also helps the customer journey. So going back to that basic really helped, and that helps us identify what exactly we should be measuring. And there are some pieces of things that we measure that are maybe not in our control, and some things that are actually in our control. So fine tuning that and being very crisp on, this is what we are here to serve, and this is something that we always should must protect, really helps us focus the right way. And then I think it leads to noise reduction automatically, because then, for example, in a previous example, I think we ended up like 10 or something. So that reduction of focus or our breadth can help us, really focus on where we need to focus in with the whole journey of MTTR. Now, the other pieces is when you are now measuring the right things, the automation and the prioritization of the backlog sort of kicks in. So in our cases, we have found a lot of noise reduction, a lot of unnecessary pieces. And once you have started to measure the right thing, it becomes clear, like, okay, this is the next bottleneck, or this is where we have to solve for to reduce the MTTR specifically. So we've had the goal of reduction of MTTR by 50% or more in our organization, which now we have like identified clear paths, which I think would be a very difficult task to do if we wouldn't have cut down on what exactly are we trying to measure and therefore improve. So that noise, I think, plays a big role than it appears. So that has been the fundamental exercise that I really recommend everybody who's struggling for MTTR reduction.
Yeah, one thing that sticks out to me in that description, first of all, that's amazing and congrats. It sounds like a pretty monumental task. To have gotten that far is remarkable. But one thing that sticks out to me is I often think about like this assumption hunting, because you had mentioned early on, like as you kind of go explore that customer journey with a group of people, you're often surprised at all of the assumptions that people make on how things work. And so kind of going through that process of assumption and reality and kind of getting those two kind of this is actually how it works, I think is a really important exercise to do because we all have assumptions on how things work that we often take for granted. And so when you're clarifying actually an understanding of how things work, that's like the important foundation upon which all of these other things are achieved. So I think that's awesome. What about all right, so Twilio is doing a lot at high scale. And so when you're scaling for high throughput and reliability, like how do you decide where to invest? Are you looking at the infrastructure layer, things that you can do to kind of help with the applications? Like, how are you investing resources and time to achieve resiliency at such a high scale as Twilio?
Yeah, I think the general essence of where do we invest is always is like $1 million question, right? I don't think it's an easy answer, but over time, like I think the investment in the platform layer has always paid dividends when done well, and extremely well. Like it really helps a lot of other teams scale. Usually, we see that often with our data teams or our queuing team and those kind of pieces where a solid investment in the infrastructure has paid dividends for so many years. But overall, I think it's true for anybody, right? I think identifying the right infrastructure and the platform which actually serves without bleeding business logic into the platform layer, and having that platform layer is actually a difficult task. But once you have that, I think scaling that has been fundamental for all my career. So getting to that point is number one, like identifying a platform layer which actually supports the larger multiple businesses and use cases, and then obviously scaling that has really helped. The application layer, I think, is it plays a really critical layer where it really influences the user or the developer experience on how they interact with one particular use cases. And not all use cases scale equally, right? So that's where I think platform scale helps, but doesn't sort of, it's necessary but not sufficient. So that's where I think identifying exactly where are our users coming from, what are the journeys they're trying to solve, and maybe they're ensuring that the application supports that use cases and does not sort of die on them has been more meaningful. So that has been more case by case, and evaluating the application. There's more business scrutiny, I feel, that goes over there in that area. But generally speaking, right, I think once you have a platform that supports multiple use cases and businesses, I think scaling that um, is an absolute must, and is probably an easier decision rather than scaling all the application layers.
Yeah. And what about on-call rotation and your incident review process? I mean, starting with a platform that you can scale and build upon makes a lot of sense. But inevitably, I'm sure incidents still come up, and we're always trying to figure out a way to like move things to the left so that we find these problems before they become incidents. And so I'm just kind of curious to hear you talk about, how has your process evolved over time? Like, what lessons have you learned to make an incident review more effective, less burdensome, and can you talk a little bit about how you've tried to shift some of that to the left to kind of find problems before they've become incidents?
Yeah, that's a good question. The on-call practices that I feel like over time now I've learned is everybody's on-call experience is different, like all other experiences, right? So I think generally speaking, they are the first line of defense when some monitors are going off and some customer journey might be in trouble. So at that point, I think the training to be getting engineers ready so that they can quickly restore the service, identify if this is something that they'll need help with, or creating incidents or those. I think that training has been very fundamental and important. We have realized that, for example, new joiners, they don't have such an experience, and that might be their first incident. So getting people or engineers early on the on-call rotation has been very important. And then we talked about MTTR and customer journeys, right? So ultimately aligning, like, these are the customer journeys and these are the journeys that must be protected, and getting everybody hands-on experience solving for some of these customer journeys has paid dividend as well. So previously, we have had cases where, that was not necessarily case because we were not really clear on the customer journeys that we were trying to solve. So getting that clarity sorted and then getting engineers to train, like this is how the system can behave. So game days and sort of like planned fires have built some good skill sets in the team so that the engineers can um, have hands-on practice on some of these cases. In things like preventing this, I think it's very difficult to prevent. That's why you're always going to have some fires. Some obvious mistakes can be avoided, or especially lessons can be learned from prior mistakes. So we have, for large systems and not, we have like blueprint reviews, and those are the good exercises that we have had our architects and principal engineers sort of help out with identifying some of these things and coaching the engineers on that. And then as much as we can, we rely on tools, right? So, tools like, Prequel and some other cases can help detect this rather more quickly. So some tools at our disposal can help preventing some of these fire or sort of like automate them a little bit more easily. So that those are the practice that we have built. But yeah, getting everybody hands-on experience, so go wide on call, and then getting to focus on specific customer journeys and building expertise have helped. But the focus has always been on like, if it happens, how do we restore it quickly, rather than making sure it just never happens. Because we haven't, I don't think anybody has succeeded on that.
Yeah. If you have, I would love to talk to you. Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we're coming towards the end of the podcast here, so we probably have time for maybe one or two more questions. If folks on the call, if you have any questions, please put them in chat, and we'll do a little Q&A here. And so while folks are thinking of questions, I kind of had I would love to get your thoughts on the future of the space that Twilio is in, right? You have Apple and others that are kind of coming into this space, talking about new messaging standards. I think I just saw last week, the national security apparatus here in the US told people to stop using text messages. So everything's always constantly changing. And I'm just kind of curious, how do you and your teams stay agile and adapt to these changes? And just kind of curious, how do you think about remaining competitive and kind of paying attention to the landscape?
I think the landscape is changing. It's actually more exciting, I feel, right? Because SMS technology, and that's not the only obviously messaging platform that Twilio has, but overall, I think that's evolving has been exciting part in 2024 has been exciting because of the launch of RCS. And in general, I feel things are getting more interactive. More and more people can do with the messaging applications that they have. Businesses want to reach messages application or people where they are in the apps or messaging platforms that they use. So I think it creates complexity. So that is good. I feel my engineer in me sort of likes that complexity because that's good problems to solve. So to your point on remaining relevant, right? I think they're much more like there's a good team at Twilio sort of taking care of that. So like I won't go into that detail, but from like the team perspective, I think that the new technology on that enables like this AI that we talked about or some other things can help us sort of problem solve POC, some of the solutions rather faster. But I think it's more important now than ever to just be staying connected to the customers, understanding what they want, where they want it, and then sort of gives us more room for like identifying the right problems that we want to solve. And personally, for me, like I like to have some space for thinking. That has helped me sort of think clearly. So I really value that time, and I think that has helped sort of me be in a better position so I can guide my partners and my team sort of to go on which problems to go solve and attack. So staying relevant in the business is important. Talking to customers, and then being able to reflect on that thinking and sort of come to a conclusion is also important.
Yeah, and again, I like to think of like the last hour of us talking, like it's space for us to think and like really learn from one another. So again,
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for taking your time to be with us on the Prequel podcast to, basically learn from your experience. This was awesome. And I wish we could have made it, multiple hours. So maybe if you've got time in the future, we can do another one. But again, Bhavin, I really appreciate your time. This was amazing. I just want to do a quick call out to the, folks listening on the call. Sign up for our newsletter. You can hear from experts like Bhavin and others. You go to prequel.dev. We just love sharing knowledge like this with the community. And so, yeah, please take a look at prequel.dev, join the newsletter. Again, Bhavin, thank you so much for your time today. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you.
No, thank you, Tony, for having me. This has been a total pleasure of mine.
Amazing. All right. We'll see you all next time. Thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you.